One of the pinnacles of competition in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, better known as a YCS. These are prestigious 2-day events that attract players from all over the world, each of them trying to win the coveted title of champion. YCS Vancouver recently took place from September 9th to 10th, 2023, and a few months earlier, after booking my airplane tickets, I made it my goal to win this entire tournament. Having made it to the top 32 of YCS Niagara Falls back in 2019, I knew that I was capable of winning a YCS, but I also realized that there would be many obstacles ahead of me that I'd have to overcome. I had come close before, and this year, I was hungrier than ever for that title. Now let me show you exactly how I prepared for my biggest tournament of the year, and to be frank, the biggest tournament of my playing career so far. My journey began all the way back on July 15, 2023, which was the Cyberstorm Access OTS Championships, which would be the last major event I would play in before Duelist Nexus released a few weeks afterward. Even though YCS Vancouver would be played with Duelist Nexus legal, this tournament was still crucial for me. If I placed top 4 or better, I would secure myself an invitation to the 2024 National Tournament, which would take a ton of pressure off to perform during the rest of the competitive season. While I was confident that I would perform well in this tournament, my primary goal was to become more familiar with the Manadium deck that I plan to play at YCS Vancouver. Manadium was set to get powerful support in Duelist Nexus, and this type of combo deck was right up my alley, so I wanted to become more familiar with the deck in the upcoming months. After signing up for the tournament and submitting my deck list, it was time to begin the first round of Swiss. After sitting down for round 1 and losing the dice roll, I get thrown a curveball right away when my opponent tells me to go first. I wasn't sure what sort of crazy strategy they could be on, but without any prior information on what my opponent could be playing, I decided the best course of action would be to just stick to my game plan and set up the best turn 1 board I could with any hand. I ended up being able to set up a very conservative board of Appaloosa, Barone, Dissipator, and a couple of hand traps since he doesn't have anything to stop me. He opens things up with a Swordswell card of all things and actually tries to play through my board, but is ultimately unable to, and we end up winning game 1. While siding for game 2, I figured that he'll probably choose to go first after seeing how he was unable to break my board, so I decided to side in cards assuming that I'd be going second. He catches me off guard again by making me go first, and my opening hand isn't the best. The only playable card in my hand is Scareclaw Rykart, and even though he doesn't open any hand traps to stop me again, all I can do is make a Chaos Angel summon using a Light and Dark monster in the hopes that I'll be able to survive the turn. Chaos Angels summoned using a Light and Dark monster is incredibly hard for a deck like Swordswell to out without seeing some sort of non-engine card like Infinite Impermanence, so I thought this would give me the best chance of surviving the turn since he hadn't used a card like that on my very first turn. Even though I have no way of stopping him from summoning a couple of his big synchro monsters, since he can't out my Chaos Angel, I end up surviving the turn. Once it gets to my turn again, I finally draw a playable card and I'm able to completely break through his board in one turn and LTK him from there to take down the match. Getting a clean win at the start of a tournament is very important for building confidence and momentum, and we start the day off right with a 2-0 win. In round 2, we get paired up against Rika Sun Avalon and unfortunately lose the dice roll. We end up losing game 1 because we don't draw any hand traps, but we manage to win game 2 because our opponent's Ash Blossom isn't enough to stop us. Going into game 3, our opponent chooses to go first, but luckily for us, they brick and aren't able to set up their combo, only ending with a Rika Concon and Rika Sheet. We find ourselves in a back and forth grind game where we come out on top thanks to Vicious Astrolod being an incredibly big body to deal with. With that win, we're now 2-0 and on the right track to making top 4. In round 3, we get paired up against Traptrix and once again lose the dice roll, meaning we're going second again. My opponent goes for the standard Traptrix combo, setting a couple of trap cards as well as a Traptrix Sarah, but they end up linking it off for a Kularia, which allows me to play through their trap holes and win the game from there. In game 2, our opponent sets up a bigger board this time with Rafflesia as well as more set cards, but we have an evenly matched to force out one of the Solemn Judgments. After that, our Kurikara Div Incarnate and a couple of extenders allow us to play through their Rafflesia and Sarah, and we close out the game from there. That puts us at 3 wins and 0 losses. One more win in these last 2 rounds would guarantee us a spot in the top 4 and an invite to the national tournament. All that's left now is to close it out. Round 4 could not have started any better for us. We get to go first, set up our full combo, and have Ash Blossom in our hand as well to win game 1 against Branded. In game 2, he sets up Gimmick Puppet Lock through Impermanence, and I had an Ash Blossom to actually potentially stop a search for Blazing Cartesia while he had one card in hand, but I chose to hold it for a potential Branded Fusion as the last card or an Albion effect during the end phase, since I figured he'd have to have hard drawn Albaz in order to make the Puppet Lock live. I'm sure you can guess what the last card in his hand was. In game 3, we get to go first, but I open very poorly once again, and I'm only able to end on a Scareclaw Tryhard and an Infinite Impermanence. I figured this should be okay since he should have a hard time outing the Tryhard, but Super Polymerization crushes those hopes and we end up losing game 3. That puts us at 3 wins and 1 loss with only 1 Swiss round left to go. We've still got a good shot to make top 4, but we absolutely have to win this last match and the pressure is on. In round 5, we get paired up against Bisteel Skystriker and are forced to go first. Even through 3 Bisteel monsters, we're able to establish a good enough board and use talents to rip the only playable card out of his hand, securing game 1. I get to go first again in game 2, but unfortunately we brick. Fortunately, however, our opponent also doesn't get much going and only passes with 2 copies of Widow Anchor. I managed to win after getting another turn, securing the match 2-0. That means I end Swiss with a record of 4-1, which is good enough for top 4. In our top 4 match, we get paired up against the Rika Sanavalon player we beat from Swiss, and I lose the die roll once again. Also, once again opening no hand traps as he performs a full Lokai combo. In game 2, I go first and set up a board through Ash Blossom, and I'm able to win from there. Now, it's down to the final game. Winning here would mean I have a shot at taking down the entire tournament and securing my first ever OTS Championship title. Once game 3 starts, I look down at my hand and see 3 copies of evenly matched Scareclaw Arrival and a Manadium Meek. Definitely the worst hand I've seen all day, and it feels like I'm destined to lose. As he performs the full Lokai combo uninterrupted, I feel frustrated. All my efforts throughout the day might be in vain if we just end up losing to something as unlikely as this. He ends up on the standard Rika end board, and I draw Terraforming for my turn. I double evenly matched him to get him down only to a Rika Strana on board, and I Terraforming for Calarium, but he has Ash Blossom for Calarium's effect, so I'm forced to set the Meek and pass my turn over. There's not much else I could have done with what I was given, and I feel like the rest of the game is just a formality at this point. During the next turn, he can't out my Meeks due to their floating effects and Calarium's effect, but he reestablishes a Regulus and a Teardrop with a Princess and Concon still alive. He also activates Spiritual Water out, rip my Scareclaw Arrival out of my hand after I draw a Droll for turn. I use my 3rd evenly matched while I have 3 cards on the field, and I get a bit lucky as he chooses to negate the 3rd evenly. I set the Droll on Lockbird and hope for a miracle. Once again, a miracle comes, and I get lucky with him tributing my Droll using Teardrop. And then I notice something strange. His extra deck is down to just 1 or 2 cards, and now the only monster he seems to have that can beat over my Meek Calarium combo every turn is a Teardrop with no XD's materials, since he burned through so much gas in the earlier turns. I start to see a glimmer of hope. I've still yet to draw into many of my engine cards, whereas he has little to nothing left. We go back and forth a few turns, with Calarium constantly bringing back the 1 Meek after being destroyed by battle, and his Rika Concon constantly tributing whatever monster I try to summon. However, eventually, I'm able to draw my engine and use Astrolaud to establish a Baronne de Fleur. After a while, I'm able to squeak out a very close win that I definitely feel like should not have gotten based on how the game started. Adrenaline is rushing through my veins after this game, and I'm still in disbelief. It feels like I've been given a second chance in this tournament, and I need to make the most of it. However, since that game took so long, I don't have any time before the final match to catch my breath. For the final match, we get paired up against the branded opponent who defeated us in Swiss. In game 1, I go first, but only have a Hero Lives as a playable card. I hard choose Scareclaw Twin Sauce, so I end with a Chaos Angel made with a Light and Dark monster, the Lightheart, and a Twin Saw. I figure that I can survive at least a few turns with Chaos Angel as long as he doesn't have a Super Polymerization to out it. Unfortunately for me, however, he had the Super Polymerization. In game 2, our hand is much better. I go first and end with the Ice Shade Synchro, Dispowder, and a Baronne de Fleur to try to play around Super Polymerization, since I can't go into a Tryhard or Appaloosa for fear of putting 2 attributes that are the same onto the board. That's good enough for us to take down game 2, and now we're moving to the all-important game 3. I've been in this spot before in previous OTS championships that I played in. I've ended up 2nd place in 2 of them, and this time I'm gunning for that championship title. Even though we've already secured our Nationals invite, there's nothing more I want than to win that title and overcome our second place curse. In Game 3, he goes first and resolves Brand Infusion, threatening a Gimmick Puppet lock the next turn. I have a Bestial Magnemite to banish it and get a search for a Druiswurm during the end phase, but once I draw for a turn, my heart sinks. I forgot to side out Vanadium Reframing from last game, and I end up dead drawing it for turn, essentially meaning I only have 5 cards to play through whatever board he has. It should have been a Triple Tactics Talents instead, which likely would have set me up to win the game a lot easier. Despite that, the rest of our hand is still okay enough, I think, to still have a shot to play through a standard branded board without the puppet lock. However, I make another critical mistake. I'm not able to get Heart's effect to search since it gets banished before I can resolve it, as I try to dodge his Mirror Jade effect on my normal summon Meek. The obsession I should have gotten from the Heart likely would have made the difference between us winning and losing the game, since at the end of the game I have a dead Visas Starfrost in hand that I can't get onto the board. I should have thought about my plays a little bit more and sequenced them a little bit better, but it had been a long day and I didn't want to take too long thinking about it with a judge watching. A combination of these mistakes ultimately makes it so we're unable to push through his board and we end up losing the match and the championship title on the next turn. Overall, it was a really unfortunate loss in the final since these mistakes were completely my fault, but overall, it wasn't a terrible showing. I still learned a lot about the Vanadium deck, and I walk away from the tournament having secured an invite for the 2024 National Tournament. A few weeks after the OTS Championship, Duelist Nexus releases and changes everything. Vanadium gets a few new cards in Vanadium Torrid, Crimson Dragon, and Visas Amritara, skyrocketing its competitive viability. While this is great and all for the deck, it's suddenly become a lot more difficult to learn all the lines and be able to adapt on the fly simply because there's so many different options now that the new cards open up. But as you all probably know, practice makes perfect, which is why at the start of the new Duelist Nexus format, I put together a fairly standard Calamity build of the deck and I play a few Vanadium Mirror matches with a testing partner to be able to see what the deck is capable of. We were both playing the Calamity FTK build at first, but after about 8 or 9 games, we're only ever able to resolve the full combo once due to consistency issues and more commonly getting hit with hand traps. The extra deck also feels a bit useless and restrictive at times since I'm essentially playing with 13 cards when going second or facing disruptions, like hand traps. Yet even before the testing, I had my doubts about this combo. It simply felt like it wasn't necessary when your regular end board was already good enough to win against most decks. The Calamity combo only really helped you to quote-unquote play through Double Dark Ruler better than the regular end board, but made you lose harder to other cards like Super Polymerization since you're forced to commit more to the board and use more extra deck resources. It simply felt too restrictive when playing it. Although I figured these initial games weren't a big enough sample size to determine whether the combo was truly good or not, I go with my gut feeling to forego the Calamity combo and instead start playing cards like Ice Shade, Jameer Adrian, and Nightmare Unicorn in the free extra deck slots since they would offer me more versatility and flexibility. While choosing not to play Calamity was a fairly easy decision for me, I am now faced with another dilemma. I had been playing Elemental Hero Prisma in my build for the longest time and now have the option to play Kashtira Fenrir instead. I play a few games and do a few test hands with the card, but it feels more like a non-engine card rather than something that actually helps me build a board. Fenrir is incredibly strong going second, and Scarecrow Kashtira can sometimes force out threats like Expertly Noir, but going first, I have to have other extenders to actually be able to make any plays with Fenrir when I don't have access to Prisma. I ultimately decide to keep playing with Prisma, but I keep the Fenrir package in my back pocket if I ever need to go back to it again. Throughout the next couple of weeks, I play as many local tournaments as I can to test the deck and go through a couple different iterations of the build, swapping around ratios of cards like Vanadium Torrid, Vanadium Obsidian, and the non-engine card like the Books. Overall, the deck feels great, and I feel like I have so many options when I'm playing both going first and second. The unorthodox cards in my extra deck like Baguska, Nightmare Unicorn, and Axis Gotalker make it feel like the deck has different modes I can switch to after getting hit with hand traps, blowouts like Dimensional Barrier, or when going for an OTK. I'm almost always OTKing through cards that should theoretically end my turn like Dimension Shifter or Dimensional Barrier, and I'm able to win a decent number of games going first even after I get hit with Droll and Lockbird. I'm able to go 3-1 or better in nearly every local tournament that I went to during these few weeks, with most of the games I'm losing due to my own misplays or factors outside of my control, which I think says a lot about how strong the deck is.
Fast forward a few weeks and it's just before the first regional tournament I'm going to be playing in the new Duelist Nexus format. I've pretty much been exclusively playing this deck for the past few weeks, so I feel ready to take on a longer and more grueling tournament, plus I want to get some more testing for YCS Vancouver. But I run into a big problem. After extensively testing online, I realized that the deck is not as infallible as I originally thought based on my locals experience. There are plenty of matchups that are bad, and the current build that I'm running doesn't really have answers to many of these problematic matchups, such as trap decks like Labyrinth. With my testing partner, we decided to create a spreadsheet and write down the top 3 best cards against what we feel are the most relevant decks in the meta, so that we can determine what the best side deck options are. In the end, we decided to go with the following build after discussing it back and forth. It's incredibly unorthodox, and it isn't like any other build I've ever seen online, but we have confidence that our theory can work. Right off the bat, we decided to go with 42 cards in the main deck since we want to play enough non-engine cards while also playing Crossout Designator in the main. We thought that this card would be incredibly strong considering our non-engine choices like the 6 books, which most decks were playing at the time, so it should also be live even when going second. Main deck and Crossout Designator also gave us the best chance to be able to stop Droll and Lockbird from being a huge blowout against us whenever we went first or second. However, to try to minimize the impact of Droll and Lockbird even without Crossout Designator, we tried to play as few cards as possible that end up losing to that card. For example, we are only playing 1 copy of Vanadium Obsidian since it ends up adding a card that can't be used if we get hit with Droll and Lockbird on resolution, even though it's almost always played at 3 in other builds. On the other hand, we still kept cards like Reinforcement of the Army for consistency because these provide immediate value even if we do get hit with Droll, since we now have a 1521 body that we can use for our plays. With this build, we tried to have as many safeguards as possible against Droll and Dimension Shifter, playing cards like Crossout for Droll and cards like Baguska and Access Code Talker in the extra deck for when we do get hit with Droll or Shifter. We tested for an almost unreasonable amount of time during this week leading up to the event on Dueling Book, and put a lot of theory into this deck, so it's time to see whether or not it's actually as good as we think it is in practice. It's now the day of the regionals, and I'm going in with one goal only. I simply want to get some more practice in with the deck and get in some good testing to see whether any more improvements could be made. Of course, doing well in the tournament will be a great boost to my confidence as well. Thanks to my second place finish at the OTS Championships a few weeks earlier, there's no pressure to do well and get my Nationals invite at this tournament. Of course, the objective when entering a tournament like this is still to win, but playing without any pressure is quite a nice feeling. On the day of, I wake up early in the morning and commute to the venue. There are a total of 256 players, so there will be a total of 8 Swiss rounds. We hopefully have a long day of playing ahead of us. In the very first round, I get paired up against Sky Strikers, who tell me to go first. It's a close game 1 that I almost lose despite full comboing, and I'm a bit shaken up as we move into the rest of the match. Unfortunately, bad hands in game 2 and 3 ultimately cost me the match as I drew 2 A Hero Lives, Prisma, Arrival, and got trolled twice. We lose the first round in a frustrating manner, but these tournaments should be seen as a marathon and not a sprint. All we need to do now is win out in order to get our top. In round 2, I get a quick 2-0 win over Kashtira. In game 1, I go first and win with Baguska after getting hit with Shifter and then OTK during the next turn, and in game 2, I have evenly matched and Book of Moon to win the game. In round 3, I get paired up against Fluanderise, which I win 2-1 in a very close series. We trade game 1 and 2, and in game 3, I sat on Baguska after eating a Droll and Lockbird and pushed through his engine and entered a long grind game where I eventually win with just 200 life points left. In round 4, I get paired versus Infernoble Knights and win 2-1. He summons Neospatian Connector game 1 and I have no hand traps, so I quickly concede to prevent him from seeing what deck I'm on. In game 2, he has no hand traps and I get to full combo him, and so we win that, and in game 3 I have Ash, Blossom and Joyspring and Droll and Lockbird, and I win by being able to OTK him after stopping him. In round 5, I lose 1-2 versus the Vanadium Mirror, where very small margins for error ultimately cost me the game. I had to make the hard read his set was a Vanadium reframing in game 3, and use my Book of Moon on his Synchro to win the game. Unfortunately, even though I considered the possibility, I ultimately lost because of the reframing and we dropped to X2, so I drop out of the tournament since I can no longer get top 8 and I already have my Nationals invite. Overall, the deck was built to beat the top decks out there, and the day was a struggle since I played versus a lot of random decks after losing round 1. However, my testing partner played the exact same list and felt that the deck was good. His matchups were more of what we built the deck for, and I'll put them up on the screen now. He was 6-1 until the last round, where he unfortunately lost a close series to tier limits, narrowly miss out on top 8. I still believed in the deck, and I felt that most of my losses were to things out of control or to myself, and my testing partner's performance with the deck convinces me that it's still good enough to play for the YCS.
In the last 2 weeks leading up to the YCS, we changed around our side deck and main deck ratios a little bit, but I now have a very important choice to make. Do I go with what I'm comfortable with and stick with the Prisma engine, or do I switch over to playing the more commonly used Fenrir package? In the past, I've always felt that Fenrir was more of a non-engine card and Prisma could just help me combo better, but after seeing the results of YCS Sao Paulo, I felt that players would try to shift to beating the Unchained deck since so many top players were on it. I ended up choosing Fenrir since I think it'll specifically be able to handle the current meta threats a lot better. Just to name a few, I thought that cards like Dimension Shifter and Anti-Spell Fragments would be quite popular, and I figured that Manadium could use the extra help breaking boards that Fenrir could offer. There's simply too much out there that would hurt Prisma, and I feel that I want a card that also gives me more than one use out of it so that my deck has some longevity as well. I ultimately decide that it's okay if my deck becomes more mid-rangey with Fenrir rather than me going all in on the combo side with Prisma. And even though I'm sacrificing some combo potential, I felt that this choice would let me have the best chance to do well since Fenrir is pretty much always good in most game states. So after a lot of discussion with my testing partner, we come up with this deck list for the event. This isn't your typical Manadium build by any means, and there are a few things I wanted to explain. We thought that despite PAX's deck list not running any hand traps, players would still choose to play them for Vancouver. We also thought that the books would still be quite popular, and given Manadium's weakness to both books and hand traps, we agreed that 3 crossout in the main decks made sense since it should be useful even when going second. In hindsight, this wasn't necessary since Stroll and Lockbird was almost a non-factor at the event, but at the time we felt that it would still be a threat worth respecting. Next were the hand trap ratios for crossout. We went with 3 Ash Blossom since it could hit everything and was decent against Unchained, but it also had some synchro applications with the Kashtira package. Impermanence was very good into almost everything and was a solid 2 of since there wasn't enough space overall. It was a good card, but we thought it would be the least likely of all the hand traps we played to be able to end a turn. Droll and Nibiru were only 1-ofs in the main deck since their applications were limited to only a few decks. We knew that we might draw crossout and one of the 1-of hand traps sometimes, but it was a concession we were okay with making since it wasn't really likely to happen. Next up are the 2 Gamma Seals. These were a last minute change that I made after getting to Vancouver, replacing Mind Control and Change of Heart that were originally there. Functionally, these were essentially the same cards for Manadium, but Kaijus also had some applications against the Pearly deck. The Kaijus are great cards into a lot of matchups, but in particular, I thought it could be good against Unchained, which I wanted to respect. With applications against cards like Brawl and Dragon 2, we thought it would be a solid choice to strengthen potentially problematic Dragon and definitely problematic Unchained matchups. Bystials were an interesting choice since they don't hit the most amount of decks, but it was incredibly strong against decks like Dragons or Branded. However, since we didn't have too many answers to Unchained, we thought that these would have to do as well. Bystials hit Yama out of the graveyard, which can stop the Griffin play and cut off their follow-up, while also exerting pressure onto the board with Druisworm. Now, while this wasn't a perfect solution to Unchained, we thought it was sufficient enough to get us there. In hindsight, a couple of the top players also agreed that Bystials were, at the time, solid cards against Unchained. Finally, in the extra deck, we chose to play 2 Lightheart and no Ice Jade. Through testing, my testing partner noticed that 2 Lightheart came up a good amount, whereas Ice Jade could be swapped for Chenging in most cases. Ice Jade was particularly good into Kashtira, but we thought that our end board, even without it, would be difficult for Kashtira to crack without some potent non-engine cards. We decided that it would be better to make ourselves slightly more resilient to hand traps by playing the second Lightheart instead. And now, with the deck complete, it's the time for me to fly to Vancouver has finally come. On the day of, I pack up my things, head to the airport, and get on my flight. While I'm on my flight, I scribble down some notes on side deck patterns for the decks that I thought would be the most relevant. This served not only as a side deck cheat sheet, but also helped me confirm that our side deck would have sufficient coverage into the most popular meta decks. There are some matchups that we aren't the best prepared for, but in terms of the most popular decks, our side deck should offer sufficient coverage. With all the preparation that I've done for the tournament, it feels like the past few months have all been leading up to this. This is definitely the most work I've ever put into preparing for an event, and going into the tournament, I feel as confident as I could possibly be. I lock in my deck list and head to sleep, ready for what's to come. All that's left now is to start the tournament. The day of the YCS finally comes and the moment of truth is here. I want to win so badly, but there's still a long road ahead of me to accomplish that. There's a total of 735 players, meaning we'll be playing 8 rounds in day 1 and 2 rounds in day 2 with a cut to top 32. After the head judge gives his opening speech, the tournament finally starts and we're off to the races. In the very first round, we get paired up against Mekanko. This is a matchup I feel super confident in since I know the general game plan of the deck is to punish you for putting monsters onto the board. In game 1, Book of Moon and Call by the Grave gets me there after I only start with Fenrir, and in game 2 he makes me start, and I OTK after passing turn 1 with an empty board using Book of Eclipse, and my full combo into his standard Mekanko board. We take down a quick 2-0 victory in round 1, which is a great way to start to the tournament and a nice confidence booster. In round 2, we get paired up against Branded Chimera. I had Ash Blossom and Impermanence both games, so he never got to play, and even without great hands that let me full combo, I was able to close it out with good standalone cards like Fenrir and Bystials, giving us another 2-0 victory. In round 3, I get paired up against Rescue Ace. We trade game 1 and game 2, and in game 3, I couldn't play through Ash and Droll, and my own Ash wasn't enough to stop him from OTKing me, so I end up losing the match 1-2, dropping our record to 2-1. Even though we're down a life already, I don't feel too bad, since I've been playing good for the most part, and the loss was essentially outside of my control. I need to keep my head up and stay focused on my goal if I want to recover. The best way to recuperate from a loss is to get quick wins in the next few rounds. In round 4, we get paired up against 60 card Warrior FDK. In game 1, I have Ash on Isolde, and I play through a Crystal Wing and Book of Eclipse since I have Crossout. In game 2, I have Ash, Druisworm, and Nibiru, and even after he rips Ash with the Neospatian Dolphin, I can still Bystial him and he ends with only Crystal Wing, which Obsession on Druisworm simply beats. We win the game 2-0 and are now 3-1, halfway through the first day. In round 5, I get paired up against Unchained, which is one of the matchups I fear the most due to a lack of experience against them. We trade games 1 and 2, and in the pivotal game 3, I brick. I end up setting a Vanadium turret and ending my turn. I think the game is over, but I somehow claw it back with a series of lucky breaks with my hand traps, which are able to keep him at bay for long enough. After 3 or 4 turns, I'm finally able to draw something playable, and I somehow win the game from there. I definitely should not have won, but things like this sometimes happen, and I move forward with a record of 4-1. In round 6, I get paired up against Unchained once again. This time the games go a lot smoother, as he scoops game 1 after I play through Impermanence, and he bricks game 2, allowing us to secure a quick 2-0 win and putting us at 5-1. One more win and we'll be locked in for day 2. In round 7, I get paired up against Dragon Link. In game 1, I made a weird play and tried to play around Droll and Lockbird, but my opponent's Druisworm prevents me from making the full board with the counter trap. He broke through most of the board I did make with Engine, but we ultimately pulled through and still close out the game afterwards. In game 2, he bricks and sets Book of Moon, but unfortunately that Book of Moon is enough for me to pass my turn as well. I stop him from making a full board and he only gets the Boral End Dragon, but I end up Kaijuing his Boral End, and even after getting nibbed and Druiswormed, I'm able to win from there, with Changing being the MVP when comboed with Astrolabe. With that win, we're now 6-1 and guaranteed to make day 2. It's a good feeling for sure, but I need to stay focused and try to finish the day 7-1 to put myself in the best position I can to top tomorrow. In round 8, I get paired up against Dragon Link once again. In game 1, I couldn't beat his Seals, Masquerena, and Druisworm boards, so I concede without playing a card to keep my deck choice secret. In game 2, I only had Obsidian and Reichphobia as playable cards, and unfortunately, exhaustion from 7 rounds of games catches up to me, and I also misplay by playing into Nibiru since I wasn't counting my summons properly. In hindsight, I don't know if I would have won anyways, considering my hand was pretty weak and his hand was all gas, but we end up losing that match 0-2, dropping us down to our last life for the tournament at 6-2. Although I make day 2 and I'm still able to top the tournament, my back is against the wall and I'll need to win both my matches tomorrow in order to get that coveted top. The pressure is on, but as I reflect on how the day went, I still feel confident since I was able to play at close to my best in almost all my games. Even though there's no more room for error, I've been in this exact spot before, where I'm fighting for my tournament life in every match. I can't say I'm exactly glad to be in this position, but at this point all I can do is reset and give it all during my next day of play. Day 2 of the YCS comes, and I get to the venue early, ready to win my 2 rounds. In round 9, I get paired up against Fluwandereeze. This can be one of the scariest decks in the game once its engine gets going, and I'm incredibly nervous when I lose the dice roll. However, after I Ashes Robina, he ends his turn and it's back over to us. At that time, I thought that double Fenrir and Torrid wasn't enough for game, but in hindsight, it was a pretty simple OTK with this combination of cards. Unfortunately, the lack of experience with the Fenrir package finally catches up to me, and I'm punished by my opponent's main deck evenly and Featherstorm when I can't OTK him, which lets him win game 1. Down 0-1 in this match, I'm now out of any wiggle room. If I lose any one of the next 2 games of the match, my tournament run is over. As I look down at my hand in this decisive game, my heart sinks. I only have Fenrir and a ball as a playable card, and to make matters worse, my opponent has Dimension Shifter which my crossout designator can't even stop. I'm forced to simply hope his hand is weak as I pass with just the Fenrir. I flounder around a little bit in the game, but I can feel hope slipping away as my opponent's engine quickly snowballs out of control, with him adding plenty of cards to his hand and re-establishing Shifter once again. Eventually, I lose the game, the match, and with them, my hopes and dreams of winning the tournament. And just like that, I'm out of contention for top 32 now at 6-3, and I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't incredibly disappointed with how the match went. I should have won game 1 easily, and even if game 2 had gone the same way as it did, I'll now never know if I would have been able to close out game 3 to advance closer to my dream. But that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. No matter how prepared you are, things don't always go according to plan. You can put in the most effort you've ever put into your preparation, but still not see the results that you want. Yet looking back, the entire YCS experience overall was great. I got to explore Vancouver, hang out with friends, and try my hand at taking down the championship title. And even though I wish things could have gone differently, I know that I gave it my all. Maybe I'm not good enough yet, but I'm going to keep trying again and again until I can finally get that title, regardless of how many times it takes. And with 2024 Nationals on the horizon, that means I'll get another shot at a big title. It's another big goal to work towards, but I'm confident that I'll be able to get there. And even if I don't, I'll just get up and keep trying again and again, year after year. If you made it this far into the video, I just wanted to say thank you. This is the most time and effort I've ever put into any one of my videos, and if you enjoyed it, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel. I'll be shifting my content style to be more competitive focused in the next bit, and if that's something you're interested in, then be sure to stay tuned. With that being said, there's just one last thing I wanted to address before I end off the video. You may be wondering why I titled the video, What It Takes to Win a YCS, if I didn't even end up winning the YCS, let alone top it. Or you might think that I'm being cocky or bold by using that title. Now, while I won't claim to know how much time and energy the best players put into their own preparation, I felt that the title was appropriate for me at least, since this was the most time I'd ever spent preparing for an event. I also entered the event with the full intention of not just topping, but actually winning it. And now even up until the very last game I played in the tournament, I fully believed that I'd still be able to come back and win. But like I mentioned earlier, in reality, I may not have what it takes yet to win a tournament of this caliber. And despite that, I'm going to keep trying no matter who or what stands in my way. I'm not going to give up on my dreams of winning a championship title, and because of that, I wanted the name of the video to embody that determination I have when I look back at this experience in the future. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you all so much once again for watching. Your support means a lot to me, and I really appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, take care.